Hi. It's been a couple of days between reviews, hasn't it? I've been reading a book that isn't a particularly fast read, but I was enjoying every sentence of it. And I really needed that because I'd just read a young adult book that was more Y than it was A, and I was suffering a bit of reader fatigue, so I went back to an old favourite, Jane Austen. So there's been more written about Jane Austen and about her work than you can probably read in a lifetime. I'm no literary critic. I never studied literature at school. So I might get things wrong, at least from a literature point of view, but here's my take on the book. So this book was, according to the foreword on my copy, published posthumously. So there were two of her books that were published after she died. Austen is known to have not done particularly well from her writing during her lifetime, which is a crying shame. Most of her acknowledgements come after it. One of the things that I think most of us here in 2024 love about Austen is her cynicism and the clear way in which she writes not only individuals and her characters in the books, but society in general. Within this book, which I have just finished, which is Northanger Abbey, as you will have seen in the thumbnail, Austen's cynicism is light years ahead of what she shows in the How the books. This is one of her last ones, and she indulges her cynicism to the fullest in this one. It's acidic enough to corrode metal, I kid you not. The sarcasm is blistering. Her general depiction of humanity is harsh enough to actually be a little bit scary at times. An example of which is on page 109 of my copy, when she is talking about the attractions of a girl. So all of her novels have an element of romantic attachment. It's a bit weak and a side effect to the story, and such a thing as Lady Susan. But Northanger Abbey, it isn't as strong a theme as it would be maybe in Pride and Prejudice, the Sense and Sensibility, but it's a pretty strong theme that runs throughout. Here she writes, "Where people wish to attach, they should always be ignorant. To come with a well-informed mind is to come with an inability of administering to the vanity of others, which a sensible person should always wish to avoid. A woman especially, if she have the misfortune of knowing anything, should conceal it as well as she can." Oh, metal corroded at 3 meters from that one. So, while in other books Austen's critical views of society are added with a light touch, in Northanger Abbey they smack you right in the head. And often they're a bit ranty. There's a whole heap of sections where basically it seems as if Austen is letting a rant of her own do the job of writing, more so in the beginning, I think. So, like many people, I first fell in love with Pride and Prejudice, which I borrowed off my mother's shelf at around the age of 13 or so. Mum was not a huge Austen fan, but she did like reading classics, and she had 2 of her books. Pride and Prejudice was the first. I read that book until it fell apart. It wasn't a brand new book when I got my hands on it, but by the end of it, the spine was split in at least 2 places, and in order to keep the pages in the right order, it needed a rubber band around it. And then I gave it to my sister. Since I was reading Austen cold, very young, with no training at all in how to read critically, and no background knowledge to help me out, I purely went on the books. So having loved Pride and Prejudice, I'm pretty sure Sense and Sensibility was the other one Mum had, and I read that. I wasn't blown away. The Dashwoods didn't really do it for me, to be honest. I thought Eleanor was a prig and Marianne was a moron. I was a critical reader in my own way. And then I went and sought out the other ones. Pride and Prejudice was always my favourite. These days my favourite tends to be whichever one I'm reading. And when I finally came across Northanger Abbey at the mature age of probably about 16, which would have made me younger than the protagonist, Catherine Morland, I didn't much like it. I didn't really understand it in many ways. I was too young to be reading it. I didn't understand what was being discussed. And I didn't have a lot of history back then either. So I didn't really understand the era, and I didn't understand the social criticisms. I thought Catherine Morland, the heroine, was stupid. I might not have been entirely wrong about that, but I couldn't see what Austen was trying to do with that young naivety and that, yes, stupidity. So I judged her very harshly. So, having not understood the criticism Austen was engaging in by using Catherine as an example, I thought she was silly, and she is. But Austen makes brilliant characters, and their brilliance is wholly based on their flaws and imperfections. The more she likes a character, the more you like her character, the more they have these flaws and imperfections, though they usually have the ability to self-analysis and to correct those imperfections. Now, Catherine Morland's flaws, which I never noticed at the time, were actually rather similar to mine as a teenager. She was an outdoor child who loved games, and Austen very interestingly describes the games that Catherine played, and they're what we would have imagined were boy games back in the era. Catherine loved reading, but she liked novels. She was an indifferent scholar. There's a point in which she talks about how boring she finds history to her friends, the Tilneys, though they themselves like history. So, having been taught by her mother, as were all her brothers and sisters, there's 10 of them, she is the ignorant character that Austen is suggesting is best when you're trying to attach someone. Catherine is not herself trying to attach someone, but she is becoming very attached to Henry. And this attachment means that she grows her opinions through his and through his sisters. And Catherine's basis in romances that are Gothic fiction gives a space for a very sarcastic and very, very nuanced by Austen about novels. I don't think I marked it, which is a shame, because it's really, really fascinating and significant. At first reading, it feels as though Austen is trashing novels and how terrible they are. But if you read into it more deeply, you've got to wonder if that's what she was actually getting at. Austen herself wrote novels, and she read novels, and it's so very nuanced that there is no way that I would have really got the gist of it as a teenager, and I'm not sure I get all of it now. So this book is in 2 sections. The 2 of them, to me, feel like they've been written very differently. Come on then. No? The first happens in Bath, where Catherine Morland goes with her friends, the Allens. And she's young, she's ignorant, she's never gotten out on the world before, she's always lived in a country. Is it a parish? Her father's a church guy, whatever, reverend, whatever. Pastor, something like that. So, yes, back to Bath. She's really quite ignorant. She's seeing the world for the first time. She makes a couple of poor attachments, but she also becomes very, very attached to Henry Tilney, who is not a poor attachment. He's a sardonic and entertaining guy in his 20s, which for 18-year-old Catherine is apparently the perfect age gap. Oh, how the times have changed. I think he'd be charged by law with interacting with a minor these days. Yes, anyway, so different times, different places. In this first bit, everything's a lot more naive, a lot more fresh. It's all from Catherine's point of view, and everything is new to her, and she's loving it. The other thing about it, though, is that you get Austen talking more to the reader. You have these long rants, sometimes almost half a page of Austen talking directly to the reader in a way that I don't think you actually see her do very much in other books. There'll be little sections of it, especially I think in Lady Susan. But overall, in most of her books, Austen gets her point across through the action, through the characters, through their discussion, and here she goes for you directly. Which is interesting, because it was late in her career. The writing is beautiful, much better than a couple of her earlier novels, in my opinion, this time around. But the tone of these speeches are often acidic and often quite angry. And Austen always uses her novels to critique things which she finds foolish about the society in which she lives. In Northanger Abbey, that is mostly sentimental novels and Gothic novels that she's targeting. We can see the negative views of Austen both on the characters of Catherine, who adores the Gothic novel, and the foolishness of her actions as a response. So when she goes to visit Northanger Abbey, she's expecting it to be the Abbey of the Gothic novel, full of candles, and she's sure there's a body buried here or there, and she keeps looking for it with a lack of success. She's surprised and confused when part of the Abbey is modern and comfortable and normal, and Austen is being pretty... she's needling with that. So she's describing how reading too much Gothic novels, if there isn't extra instruction, will make someone silly and unrealistic. And in Catherine's bestie from Bath, Isabella Thorpe, seems to me to be the epitome of criticism of the stupidity that the sentimental novels could lead people to. Her behaviour is inauthentic, affected. She's dishonest. Isabella engages herself to Catherine's brother, but then what she thinks is a more wealthier option comes along, and she's an incredibly false character. And though Austen not loving novels nor thinking them deleterious was really too subtle for me to understand the first time I read this in my teens, it really comes clear from the fact that Henry Tilney, as well as his sister, enjoy novels, but treat them realistically as entertainment and are capable of being sensible about the novels themselves, as well as being intelligent and rounded characters. And this is a maturity and an understanding that Catherine has to work toward throughout the novel. But the conversation in which Catherine, Henry Tilney, and his sister are walking and they discuss novels and then they discuss histories, make it very clear the difference of good instruction, rounded reading will make to someone who basically lets their fancy wander and read whatever they like. That would have been me as a teenager. That's probably one of the reasons I disliked Catherine so much, was there were so many shades of young Deb there. Yes, so in the second part of the novel, Catherine is invited to stay at Northanger Abbey. And I remember just enough to remember that this invitation was based on the assumption that she was an heiress, which she isn't, and that Mr. Tilney, or is he a Colonel Tilney, the father of her two friends in any case, is very keen to promote her relationship with Henry and her friendship with his daughter. All of that ends when he finds out that she isn't in fact an heiress. He dumps on a coach with no money and means of getting home, but she gets there. And this second part, which is more solidly packed, perhaps less sweet and naive and bright than the first part of the novel, is more about the effect of money on love and fortune. And that's a theme that Austen sort of went with throughout, because the women in her novels usually need to marry for love, except in the case perhaps of Emma, who emphatically doesn't need any money and declares that on a regular basis. But the effect of money on matrimony is a central Austen theme, because it was a central theme for the people of her day, being as how there was virtually no way for a woman to make a living other than to inherit money or to marry it. It's a significant effect on any woman of independent thinking, which Austen most certainly was. So the second part of Northanger Abbey is probably the strongest thematically in terms of money and its effect on love and fortune that I can think of it in any of her books. The protagonist doesn't think that way. She is sweet for all her flaws. She's got a lot of flaws, but she is sweet and she's unspoiled. She doesn't understand materialistic attitudes of the people surrounding her. She's completely oblivious to the hints that are thrown at her because she just doesn't think that way. Catherine growing into a knowledge of herself and the world around her, that's a central theme of the book. And the second part is all about how matrimony is affected by goods. So it's heavier hitting than the first part. But the two parts together make a really, really nice book. And now I'm going to talk about the book itself. Isn't it gorgeous? Look at all that shininess, and you probably can't see it with the reflection, but this is textured. Northanger Abbey. Oh yes, I've always liked books with gold. Here we've got a book with silver. It is so reflective it feels cyberpunk. It feels like I've gotten a piece of aluminium in my hand and it's nearly as heavy. But, so, no promotion here. There's Chiltern Classic. About a decade ago, I noticed that some of the classics were being reissued with the most gorgeous, spectacular, lush covers. And I loved them. But I'm not a book collector. At heart, I have books because I read them. Every book you can see behind me here, I've read. In fact, anything on that shelf or that shelf or that shelf, I have read probably many, many times. Not being a collector, the beauty of the book affected me less than it otherwise might have. I wanted them, but they were expensive, and I didn't really have the budget for them. And the books that I cared about the most, I already had. I didn't see a point of getting a new one. Now, a while ago, I realised that I didn't have Northanger Abbey. I didn't have it at all. Probably because when I was young, it was my least favourite of the books. I may have owned a copy a long time ago. I think I did. It was a paperback, and I think I got rid of it in a move. So I didn't have a copy of Northanger Abbey. That gave you the perfect excuse to get one of these gorgeous books that are out and about. I really love it. It was nice to read. It's heavy, it's got some weight to it, but the paper quality is great. The print is nice. I enjoyed everything about the actual reading experience of this book, which is unusual for me because the normal style of book I have looks more like this. Actually, this is a good quality book by my standards. What am I saying? So I bought Northanger Abbey from Chiltern Classics. Very happy with it. I didn't have it already, so I felt justified. And I'm probably going to go out and get Sense and Sensibility. I do have a copy of Sense and Sensibility. Ah, there it is. This isn't my first copy of Sense and Sensibility. It's not the one that my mother owned many years ago. That fell apart many years. Not that many years, actually. Fell apart many years ago. This is probably my first third copy of Sense and Sensibility. As we can see, it's not doing well. This is more how my paperbacks look most of the time. And this is a perfect excuse to get another copy. I do quite like the artwork on it. But one thing that I don't like a lot about some of the classic books like the Austens, I have two persuasions there, by the way. One of them is this thin, the other one's that thin, because all too often your book is bulked out by the fact that a third of it is other people writing about the book. I've learned a lot from those people, not to criticise the forewords and the afterwords and the critical analyses, but one thing I really like about the Chiltern copy is that all you get before volume 1 is one small amount of information about the book. So this is pure, unadulterated, Jane Austen, Northanger Abbey. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I will now reread it. I think as a teenager I was way too young for it. This time I enjoyed it more than I ever have before, and more than a couple of the other Austens, which I now feel that I need to reread. I probably will. Okay. Thank you for watching another review. It's a bit left field. I know most of mine are classic sci-fi and fiction, but I am the omnivorous reader, and I do read omnivorously. You too should read good books.